Here in Thailand, so I'm very happy.
In higher education, European Union delegations, ASEAN University.
At present, Myanmar is taking the duties and responsibility also at we are involved in the development of the education sector, mostly in the higher education. So networking and coordinating for the education developments, and also promoting to the international collaboration, cooperation, and also student mobility, and also credit transfer system.
The project has been doing a lot of aspect of development in higher education. For example, scholarship for student mobility and the quality assurance, as well as involving high-level officials for the policy dialogue as well, which we think that this is a very good way of connecting the region.
Okay, and after that, one point or one question or one concern.
Really over the next 2 years is going to focus on building the sustainability of the different result strands so far. That means embedding the credit transfer system across the ASEAN region, building more and more opportunities for young people to access opportunities to travel across the region to build their understanding, but also to enhance their professional qualifications and further employment opportunities as a result.
We not only get to experience studying our courses in another country, but then we also really grow as individuals culturally and working towards one another in consolidating or in identifying ourselves with ASEAN.
QA, QF, already quality assurance frameworks.
It was amazing for me to spend the last 4 years working on this program, and now the program will be extended. I hope the result will be exactly what people are expecting for.
The mobility theme is to really have that mainstreamed and aligned within ASEAN still.
Activity yesterday afternoon, and it's the opportunity for each.
Over the last day and a half, we've worked very hard with ASEAN member states, institutions and other stakeholders to try and develop a vision for SHARE and how SHARE can support over the next 2-year extension. It's been very positive, and we look forward to getting some really strong outcomes from this meeting that will help us to deliver and support the development of this higher education space in the next 2 years.
Distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome you to the third day of the EU Support to Higher Education in the ASEAN Regions Policy Dialogue 12. My name is Darren McDermott, and I'm the team leader of the SHARE programme. SHARE is the largest higher education cooperation programme underway in ASEAN. The programme's overarching objective is to strengthen regional cooperation and enhance the quality, competitiveness, and internationalisation of ASEAN higher education. And this contributes to the development of an ASEAN higher education space. SHARE's approach to supporting regional higher education is inclusive. The programme engages with ASEAN and relevant non-ASEAN entities to build on existing initiatives and serve as a platform for engagement with the wider higher education community in the region. As a programme, we promote the values of equity, diversity and inclusion in all of our activities, and I'm pleased to announce that next week we'll be launching a call for proposals for a study on gender, equity, diversity and inclusion to be conducted between August and September. So please keep a close eye on the SHARE website for the call if this would be of interest to you. It now gives me great pleasure to welcome His Excellency Ambassador Morikawa Toru, Executive Director of the Asia-Europe Foundation based in Singapore. Ambassador Morikawa joined the Asia Europe Foundation as its 8th executive director in August 2020. He's a seasoned career diplomat bringing decades of experience and expertise to ASEF. His previous postings include serving as Minister, City Head of Mission, Embassy of Japan in Iran, and Minister Councillor, Embassy of Japan in France, where he was in charge of various cultural exchange initiatives. He's also worked in the areas of media and regional economic cooperation and has experience in cultivating and enhancing partnerships for projects with different organizations, including the private sector. Ambassador Morikawa received his bachelor degree in law from the University of Tokyo, and he is fluent in Japanese, French, and English. So welcome to the Share Policy Dialogue, Ambassador Morikawa. Yoroshiku onegai itashimasu.
Thank you so much for Your Excellencies, distinguished participants. My name is Morikawa Toru, the Executive Director of the Asia Europe Foundation. It is a great honor for me to speak at the policy dialogue of the European Union support to higher education in the ASEAN region SHARE, co-organized by the European Union and the ASEAN Secretariat. From Singapore, I wish a good afternoon to the friends in Asia and a good morning to the partners in Europe. ASEF is an intergovernmental non-for-profit organization which brings together the people of Asia and Europe through intellectual, cultural, and people-to-people exchanges, so that Asians and Europeans address common global challenges together. It is the sole permanent institution of the Asia-Europe meeting, a dialogue process involving senior officials, ministers, and leaders. For ASEF, education is one of our key thematic areas, and our work in education aims to foster collaboration between youth, students, teachers, educators, higher education and edtech experts, with policymakers across Asia and Europe. One of the pillars of our activities related to education is to promote equity and inclusion in higher education. It contributes to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. ASEF is contributing to the vision of the ASEAN Education Process, AEP. By 2030, the AEP will contribute to a more prosperous, resilient, and sustainable Asia-Europe education region, better prepared for current and future global challenges. The AEP seeks to promote inclusive and equitable quality education and training through equal and mutually beneficial partnerships leveraged by people-to-people connectivity. At the last ministerial meeting, ASEAN education ministers had highlighted that the AEP should aim at ensuring inclusion and equality in education by building comprehensive systems that are accessible to all. The ASEF Regional Conference on Higher Education, ARC, is the official dialogue partner of the ASEAN Education Ministers meeting. It is only bi-regional multi-stakeholder dialogue platform for university and student leaders, policymakers, and ministers to discuss higher education issues to shape the education landscape in Asia and Europe. The 8th edition of ARC is inviting Asian and European higher education and student leaders to leverage on the current COVID-19 disruption and make inclusion and diversity central values. Titled Outlook 2030, Inclusive and Diverse Higher Education in Asia and Europe. ARC 8 will explore how universities and the students can foster inclusion and diversity in the final decade for the Agenda 2030. The theme aligns with the priority areas of the ASEAN Education Process 5 and the upcoming 8th ASEAN Education Ministers meeting. In addition, ASEF will organize spin-off activities focusing on disseminating findings of the Arcade Outlook Report 2030 and build capacity for local and regional stakeholders. Distinguished participants, it is in this context that ASEF plays its part in the discussion at today's policy dialogue. ASEF applauds the partnership between the European Union and ASEAN, which is taking steady steps guided by the Bangkok Declaration on Advancing Partnership in Education for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in ASEAN through different projects such as SHARE. The mutual recognition of the higher educational system, such as credit and application, across the ASEAN countries would be a key institutional backbone to promote equity and inclusion in higher education, not only between the members, but also in respective domestic educational systems for different groups of the society, as well as with different ASEAN partners. According to the SHARE infographic on higher education in Asia, I quote, Southeast Asia is one of the most vibrant and fastest growing regions in the world. With a population of over 630 million, the region accounts for a significant share of global trade and investment. Southeast Asia is home to some 7,000 higher education institutions, with around 12 million students. As connectivity increases and the ASEAN community expands, national higher education systems are rapidly changing, and internationalization in the sector is accelerated in the emerging ASEAN higher education area. End of quote. If I allow myself to add an element to this remark, it is a diversity in the region. It is a region extremely rich in diversity with different religions, cultures, and academic traditions. The higher education system of each country is different because it stems from such different backgrounds. The mutual recognition is only possible based on the mutual understanding and trust through a long-lasting dialogue with political will and endurance. The experience over a number of decades by EU in bridging such difficulties would be a good source of reference for ASEAN members. I remember well my younger days in France to mingle with the students from every corner of Europe and the world. The conversations with them opened my eyes to a greater world. At the same time, I believe that the cooperation between the two major regional organizations will provide the Europeans with good food for thought for their ongoing further efforts. Distinguished participants, allow me to quote an extract from the European Commission website. I quote, "Higher education and its links with research and innovation play a crucial role in individual and societal development, and in providing the highly skilled human capital and engaged citizens that Europe needs to create jobs, economic growth, and prosperity." The higher education is one of the important keys for our societies to step into the greener economy in the post-COVID-19 era, which will be built back better from the pandemic. To ensure the equity and inclusiveness in higher education is the best investment for the future for all of us in Asia and Europe. I wish all of you a fruitful discussion today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Many thanks for your comprehensive keynote on Asia-Europe cooperation in advancing equity, diversity and inclusion, Ambassador Morikawa. We really appreciate it. We in the SHARE program are also great believers in the new ASEF motto that diversity creates. And before we move into our panel discussion, we'd like to share with you some of our SHARE Scholarship alumni's thoughts on how diversity can also mean unity in a video they made for Europe Day on May 9th this year.
Nagagalak kitang makilala.
Open-minded.
Together.
Oneness. Tolerance.
Uniform.
Unity is one mind in body.
Accepting differences.
Unity is what makes us stronger.
Happy Europe Day!
And we're very much looking forward to ASEAN Day coming up on the 8th of August as well. We're also looking forward to having 300 more SHARE Scholarship alumni as a result of the SHARE extension up to the end of 2022. So now I'm very pleased to introduce our panel chair and moderator for today's session and friend of the program, Ms. Leonie Nagarajan, Director, Education Department at the Asia-Europe Foundation based in Singapore. Leonie has been working in the field of international relations for over 15 years with a focus on education diplomacy and since 2014. And as Director of the Education Department at the ASEF, Asia-Europe Foundation, she's responsible for leading the department in the conceptualization and execution of the program portfolio covering 51 countries across Asia and Europe. Her work addresses education policies and higher education cooperation, activities in the fields of lifelong learning, as well as experiential learning and skills development for young people. Great to have you here, Leonie, and over to you to introduce the focus of the session and the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Darren, for the invitation, and good afternoon from Singapore. Like my Executive Director, Ambassador Toru Morikawa, I'm here at the ASEF office, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Ambassador Morikawa has already mentioned that diversity, equity, and inclusion are key priorities of our work, and even more so, I'm delighted to moderate the session and together with the audience learn from 4 distinguished experts who I'd like to introduce. It's wonderful to have you with us today. Dr. Wesley Teta, who's a senior consultant at UNESCO's Asia and Pacific Regional Bureau for Education. Hello, Wesley, good to see you again. Our second speaker is Ms. Rodora Babaran. She's the Director for the Human Development Directorate at the ASEAN Secretariat. Hello, Rodora. Our third speaker is Ms. Rauda Nasran. She is the CEO and founder of the social enterprise Accelerate Global. Great to meet you for the first time today, Rauda. And last but not least, Dr. Yang Mi Eng, who is the Executive Director at the ASEAN Foundation. Hello, Dr. Yang. Before we start our exchange, I think it's good to set first the stage and the policy framework for our dialogue today. And this is the declaration, the 2019 Bangkok Declaration on Advancing Partnership in Education for the 2030 Agenda. And here in this declaration, the heads of states and governments emphasize the crucial role of inclusive, equitable and quality education, as well as the promotion of lifelong learning opportunities for all in realizing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. From a policy declaration, we need obviously move to concrete actions on the ground. And earlier this month, education specialists from global and regional organizations met to discuss the development of an ASEAN work plan on education 2021 to 2025. And this work plan has diversity, equity, and inclusion as one of its priorities when you look closely at the various activities which are to be planned and to be conducted. So I look forward to exploring with our 4 experts in more detail some of the policy issues on the ASEAN agenda, the barriers and opportunities when it comes to DEI, and which initiatives are really driving DEI in the ASEAN international education. I want to highlight at the very beginning, we have 4 excellent experts with us, and they will give presentations between 5 to 7 minutes. But at the same time, we have also experts in our audience, and we have curious learners here as well. So we will be switching between presentations and audience engagement. We have prepared some audience polls, and these will be shared in the chat later. You can log in. It's Mentimeter. I think everybody of you knows after 1 year living half a virtual life how Mentimeter works, and we will also share on screen how to log in. Without further ado, I go and introduce our first speaker, Wesley Teta, who is, as I said, Senior Consultant at UNESCO's Regional Bureau for Education here in Bangkok. Wesley is also a consultant for the Asian Development Bank. He's advisor to the Learning Economy Foundation's AP Lab and frequently speaks for the World Bank's EdTech series on blockchain education. Wesley's research focuses on monitoring policy implementation, collaborative governance, and accountability in development contexts. And Wesley, I truly expect from you that we will hear shortly key statistics and trends on diversity, equity, and inclusion in ASEAN. The floor is yours. Thank you so much for being with us here.
Thank you so much, Leonie, and distinguished participants and guests. First of all, to EU Share and the European Commission for their strong support, and to the ASEAN Secretariat for your leadership in the region, which we think is just crucial. I'm just so impressed with our start, and thank you for this opportunity to be with you on behalf of UNESCO's Asia Pacific Regional Bureau for Education. Ambassador Toru, your remarks were just inspirational and outstanding frame for what I'm going to talk about, which is equity, diversity, and inclusion in ASEAN's internationalization of higher education, but perspectives from UNESCO. And I think this is important to really say what we've already committed to. What is our exciting program for unity going forward that we've already set as our baseline commitment based on our own shared values? I'm going to try to put some data to that, because I think going forward, this is important that we're not only promoting collaboration, but starting to measure and monitor what we mean by that in terms of progress over time, including shares commitments. So I'll be very brief, but I know there's a lot more to this topic, particularly in the impacts of COVID-19. There's no single slide that could capture the devastating impacts of COVID-19 worldwide, particularly for the context of education.
Wesley, can I still check? Are you with us, or did we lose you? EU Share Secretariat, can you just let us know if Wesley is still on in our meeting, or did we lost him? Okay, no sound. I see that in the chat he's disconnected. Okay, then I would suggest in the meantime, while we try to get Wesley from Bangkok back in our virtual meeting, we move on to the second speaker, and we will hopefully get him back soon. Our second speaker is Rodora Babaran from the ASEAN Secretariat. Rodora has an academic background in development management and social work. She has been Director of Human Development at the Department of the ASEAN Social Cultural Community since 2014. And here, Rodora, you manage a really diverse operation portfolio, and you cover 4 divisions: health, education, youth and sports, labor and civil service, and the poverty eradication and gender division. So with this interdisciplinary outlook and work scope, I look already forward to your insights on how DEI in higher education is linked with many other areas and pertinent issues in society, such as demographic changes, labor and employment, health and well-being. Rodora, please, the floor is yours. And I keep fingers crossed that we can continue with your presentation until the end.
Thank you very much, Leonie. And as always, we have to be agile in anything that comes along. So very good afternoon to all the participants and delegates to this meeting. We hope to see Dr. Wesley again to continue on the discussion. But let me just hope that this one will be able to provide more insights and appreciation on the part of our delegates on what ASEAN is doing in terms of higher education, internationalization, and how this is contributing to diversity, inclusion, and equity. So, first off, I would like to start by emphasizing that inclusion, sustainability, and resilience are at the heart of the ASEAN Sociocultural Community Vision 2025, drawing from the overall guidance from the ASEAN Community Vision 2025. As you can see in the Vision 2025 that was adopted by the leaders in 2015, ASEAN envisions a peaceful, stable, and resilient community with enhanced capacity to respond effectively to challenges, and ASEAN as an outward looking region within a global community of nations while maintaining ASEAN centrality. So, inside this big document is the ASEAN Sociocultural Community Blueprint 2025 that envisions an ASEAN community that engages and benefits the people and is inclusive, sustainable, resilient, and dynamic. So, ASEAN declarations are also in place to support equity, diversity, and inclusion in ASEAN higher education. And this includes the Kuala Lumpur Declaration on Higher Education that was adopted in 2015. It relegated higher education as one of the catalysts in accelerating ASEAN's economic, political, and sociocultural development agenda. We also have the Bangkok Declaration on Advancing Partnership in Education for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in ASEAN that was adopted in 2019. It stipulated the crucial role of inclusive, equitable, and quality education, as well as the promotion of lifelong learning opportunities for all in realizing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We also have the ASEAN Declaration on Human Resources Development for the Changing World of Work that was adopted last year, and it highlighted the need to equip ASEAN's human resources with the competencies that will prepare them to be future ready, thereby enabling them to actively contribute to the sustainable development, competitiveness, and resilience of ASEAN. And then also last year, the education ministers adopted the joint statement of the Conference on the Digital Transformation of Education Systems throughout ASEAN, which envisage to strengthen the linkages between expanding digital access, digital literacy, transferable skills, inclusion and equity, private sector partnerships, and the future of work and the role of young people in digital transformation process. So in this region of over 650 million people, where 20 million are higher education students in about 7,000 higher education institutions, there lies so much potential to achieve the ASEAN aspirations in terms of diversity, inclusion, and equity. In the last 30 years, there has been a major improvement in educational enrollment across ASEAN, particularly at primary school level. Even at tertiary level, including university, TVETs, among others, enrollment has risen to 20 million students across ASEAN, which is quite split evenly across the sexes. And this represents a median enrollment rate of 33% of young people and a quadrupling of higher education student numbers over the 30-year period. So, however, the sheer size and diversity of countries in this region, their capacities, systems, and policies necessarily pose big challenges as well in fully realizing equity, diversity, and inclusion. So, over the years, ASEAN has been strengthening regional cooperation to enhance the quality and competitiveness of higher education in the region. Supporting the mobility of students in the region is an important aspect of ASEAN's work on the internationalization of higher education. Therefore, at this point, I wish to share what ASEAN has been doing in promoting diversity, inclusion, and equity in higher education through its efforts on higher education internationalization. So we have the SHARE program, which was implemented since January 2015 up to present. And the overall objective of the program is to strengthen regional cooperation, enhance the quality, regional competitiveness, and internationalization of ASEAN higher education institutions, contributing to an ASEAN community in 2015 and beyond. Under this program, a total of 500 scholarships for intra-ASEAN and ASEAN-EU student mobility has been provided. We've conducted 11 policy dialogues so far, and 12, including this one, and 11 capacity building workshops and trainings for practitioners and staff. Beyond the EU Share program, several scholarship offerings are also available for ASEAN students, supported by dialogue partners, namely China, Norway, Republic of Korea, India, Canada, the US, and Hungary. Other initiatives also include the establishment of working groups on higher education that facilitate dialogues, collaboration, and promotion of quality assurance and mobility of higher education. You would see on the screen we have the ASEAN Working Group on Higher Education Mobility 2025, and it aims to deliberate on, assess, and eventually transfer the ASEAN EU credit transfer system and implement the ASEAN higher education space within the framework of the ASEAN Education Work Plan 2021 to 2025. We have recently adopted the terms of reference for this working group, and we had the launching and first meeting of this working group in conjunction with this share policy dialogue. We also have the working group on mobility of higher education and ensuring quality assurance of higher education among ASEAN plus three countries. So that means China, Japan, and Republic of Korea. This working group strengthens and facilitates policy dialogue, coordination, collaboration, and promotion of quality assurance and mobility of higher education amongst the plus three countries. So far, it has developed a guide on the availability of information online to promote mobility of higher education in ASEAN plus three countries. And the team already drafted the joint guideline on the institutional provision for new modes of higher education. Now, let me share with you that there are persistent challenges for ASEAN higher education, including unemployment, skills gap, and accelerated rate of the fourth industrial revolution. The COVID 19 pandemic has also exacerbated the issues regarding education equity, quality, and efficiency, especially the limited access to infrastructure devices and resources of the vulnerable and most marginalized groups. There's also a need to strengthen collaboration and coordination of activities of ASEAN member states, the ASEAN University Network, the Southeast Asia Ministers for Education, or SIMU, to maximize the impact and ensure efficient use of resources. While quality assurance, credit transfer systems, scholarship support for mobility programs are all important components of a regional higher education space, there are many other elements that must be put in place to ensure higher education is ready to develop an inclusive, resilient, and future ready human resources. And central to achieving an inclusive ASEAN that leaves no one behind is increasing investment in education, research, and upskilling across all of ASEAN. Definitely, there is room for improvement in terms of speed, scale, and effectiveness of the initiatives mentioned. Therefore, the 15th Senior Officials Meeting on Education emphasized the need to strengthen collaboration and coordinated activities between and among the SOMED, AUN, and SIMU. And tackling these challenges has been increasingly urgent, particularly due to the intensified impact caused by the COVID 19 pandemic. Furthermore, uh, the impacts of COVID 19 on education are staggering. As with the rest of the education sector, the fallout from the COVID 19 for higher education is dramatic. International student mobility has been disrupted due to widespread travel restrictions and university closures. In the midst of the pandemic last year, a rapid assessment was conducted on the impacts of COVID 19 on social welfare, labor, and education sectors. And it was undertaken with the support of the Asia Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation. The results of this rapid assessment revealed that around 152 million children and youth in ASEAN were most likely affected by the closures of schools. The assessment revealed that the pandemic has brought critical issues regarding education equity, quality, and efficiency. And this includes limited access to infrastructure, devices, and resources, lack of teaching materials tailored to disadvantaged students, lack of support to vulnerable students and their families, the need for alternative modes of assessment, and low investments in adapting the curricula and programs. So, the move towards ASEAN Vision 2025 and beyond. Uh, Below are some of the immediate and long term steps that ASEAN we'll need to undertake based on evidence and in order to build back better. Most of these are taken from the recommendations of the research work from the rapid assessment done by the Asia Foundation and also the AREA study on ASEAN Vision 2040 and study on enhancing intra-ASEAN student mobility. So for the immediate and medium term, you can see here what are the imperatives, and this includes coordinating regional dialogues and joint analysis on school reopening that ensures health and safety during the pandemic, developing a regional toolkit for high quality remote teaching and learning, revise the competency framework for ASEAN teachers, coordinate regional dialogues on adapting the TVET and higher education curriculum to the post COVID future of work. Through the ASEAN Working Group on Higher Education Mobility, there is a need to develop a cohesive roadmap to realize and implement the higher education space for ASEAN, to facilitate the transfer of ownership of the SHARE program outcomes to ASEAN community, and to implement the ASEAN Work Plan on Education 2021 to 2025 to enhance regional capacity in higher education as part of lifelong learning provision, including the harmonization of ASEAN higher education. We also drew some recommendations from the ASEAN Vision 2040 as developed by the area, and it includes long-term recommendations such as having an inclusive ASEAN that leaves no one behind, where it is central to invest in education, research, and upskilling across all of ASEAN. We also need policy strategies for an adaptive, innovative, and inclusive digital ASEAN to benefit more from the emerging and third unbundling and industry 4.0, including the improvement of the quality of and access to education across different levels of education, institutionalizing continuous and lifelong learning and skills upgrading, embracing digital transformation and industry 4.0, and countering job losses and disruptions from the digital economy will require transformative education, lifelong skills development, and innovative enterprises and startups, and enabling greater mobility amongst the region's youth as they shape the future of the ASEAN community by 2040 through the example of an internship, visa-free scheme, student scholarships, and student exchanges. So that I've reached the end of my presentation. I hope this has been a meaningful presentation for you, and I look forward to further discussions later on in the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rodora. That was a solid overview of the various policy frameworks and cooperation mechanisms, but also concrete programs that should drive inclusion and sustainability, but also resilience in the ASEAN region. And you have mentioned a number of regional cooperation mechanisms that should be strengthened in the context of the ASEAN Vision 2025. Now it's my task to share the screen very briefly. I saw that a number of our audience members have already responded to the poll. Rodora mentioned there is a working group on higher education. There are several working groups, in fact, and I think these kind of inputs from our audience members today would be useful for them to really understand what the ASEAN education sector should focus on and should prioritize. It's a little bit small. I know that you could see it on your own devices. We have here various options. Is it conduct policy forums? Is it a support of qualification frameworks and quality assurance? Should the ASEAN education sector focus on designing and institutionalizing ASEAN-wide digital credit transfer systems? Is it about an ASEAN-branded scholarship scheme? We need to strengthen university capacity building, or is it promoting inter- and intra-regional student exchange programs? So please let us know. It's never too late to join the poll. It is open throughout the whole session and more questions are coming. So your views are really appreciated. And I have the good news that Wesley is back with us. The connection only dropped for a short while. So I'll rewind now and go back. Wesley, I think we were on slide number 2 in your presentation, and our attention is now fully yours.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Apologies for the IT drop. I gave a passionate presentation for one. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to continue on a few good points and build on our director, of course, our colleagues and friends, and everyone who has gone so far, including Ambassador Toro. So I wanted to link this conversation back to the focus on human rights, our shared commitment. And I just wanted to read for you Article 26, which for me is critical and an inspiration for all of the activities that should guide us. Everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. Technical and professional education shall be made generally available, and higher education shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. I think this shared commitment is fundamental to what we're talking about in terms of equity, and I think it's something that we should continue to take inspiration from and build on. That commitment has inspired the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which you see here on the screen. This is our universal, transformative, and integrated plan for change. It's our shared agenda, if you will. And as you know, in Southeast Asia, we are continuing to struggle with this work plan. This is not to say that Southeast Asia is the only region struggling with this. Worldwide, we have a very similar picture of commitment, but a lack of progress to date as of 2020. And I can assure you, as the impacts of COVID-19 have only made learning inequalities more dramatic, Southeast Asia, to put it briefly, is not on track to achieve SDG 4 currently. So we need significant commitments, and we need to do that in the context of collaboration in ASEAN and with our partners in Europe. There's a lot we can do together, which is why we're here today. That point there on a weak evidence base is for this next slide. I want you to think about how we measure progress, how we measure equity and commitment in the context of the SDGs. This is the breakdown of SDG 4. This is our targets. This is how we measure progress, and you'll notice some gaps there. We're looking there at the bottom, and particularly at SDG 4.B, which is scholarships for mobility. From 2015 to 2020, we had all committed to saying we want to dramatically or substantially increase the availability of scholarships to developing countries. This is really an important benchmark. But as of today, Southeast Asia and the UN system, based on national data, cannot tell you if we are on track or not, because we have insufficient data points to draw a coherent picture for the region. Now, this is important, because the European Commission, our friends at national level and government, ASEAN as a whole, is looking to create an ASEAN branded scholarship. And as of today, we don't have an accurate baseline. I want us to think about that, and I raise it as a challenge to EU Share and all of our partners in ASEAN to collaborate with the UN system on how we benchmark and measure equity and access to scholarships for mobility, for example. I just want to briefly come to this point on this transformation of higher education that's taking shape, because scholarships for mobility could mean different things now that we are facing the impacts of COVID-19. In particular, virtual mobility is becoming increasingly important, as well as physical mobility once we get the pandemic under control. UNESCO is committed to promoting fair and transparent recognition of qualifications. We do this through the Tokyo Convention on Recognition. We have more than 12 countries in Asia Pacific committed to the Tokyo Convention. And as of today, we do not have any countries in Southeast Asia that have committed to the Tokyo Convention. So I raise that because all of our partners in East Asia, the +3, are involved in the Tokyo Convention on Recognition as a forum for governance, how we promote fairness and transparency in the recognition of qualifications. I think this is critical. We want to raise this at policy level so that we promote the benefits of being being at the table to make decisions, as we promote, for example, recognition of online and blended learning. This is very critical and an exciting piece of work that I want to raise in the context of ASEAN and our collaboration going forward, including our collaborative research with EU Share. So we do want to be part of this platform and collaboration, including with our friends and colleagues across ASEAN. So I hope you will count on UNESCO for this human rights-based approach and evidence-based approach as we look at the role and relevance of higher education qualifications going forward. We have a lot to discuss, but UNESCO is here across these disciplines. You know that we are available. We want to be a part of your work plans, and I thank you very much for our opportunity to be with you here today. And with that, I'll pause and look forward to our continued discussion. Thank you again.
Thanks so much, Wesley. I didn't want to miss this presentation and the trends and statistics which you have shared with us, because there was a real reality check on where we are here in Southeast Asia in terms of achieving Agenda 2030 and the targets for SDG 4. And it doesn't look too good, unfortunately. Maybe it could be better, but we don't know, as we are lacking the relevant data. So this is truly a call for action to the other governments, actually globally as well, to see how we can benchmark and how we can better monitor. So I'm going to share again with the audience a slide for our next poll question, because we would like to know from you, how optimistic or pessimistic are you? And in terms of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on higher education, and how soon we will be getting back on track towards Agenda 2030. So if I look at the current statistics, more are optimistic. By the end of 2022, we will be back on track. Others say we will be back on track for Agenda 2030 in about 5 years. We will need this decade to recover. Some say, thankfully, nobody is too pessimistic so far and says it will take much longer, only after 2030. So Wesley, I think they have trust still in the system, in UNESCO and our and national governments, that we will be able to get out of this soon and back on track. Now I move to our third speaker. And our third speaker is Ms. Rauda Nasran, who is the CEO and founder of the social enterprise Accelerate Global. Rauda, I will introduce you first and foremost as an advocate for change and a youth empowerment enthusiast, because that's what you truly are. You have recently graduated in law from a university in the UK, but even then already you started a social enterprise, Accelerate Global. I think it was ranked top 3 in the UK. You managed over 100 members globally to develop programs on youth employment, on skills development. So that's fantastic. So no wonder that you have received the President and Team Leader of the Year award in the United Kingdom, actually as the first Asian Muslim woman. Very inspiring. You've been invited to speak next to head of states, Nobel Peace Prize laureates in national parliaments, but now we have you here at the EU Share Policy Dialogue. So that's good. And the floor is yours. I think you will give us a youth perspective, share with us how the youth can also contribute to setting DEI on the education policy agenda, and what are the barriers, obstacles, opportunities, aspirations on the ground. Please, Rauda, go ahead.
Thank you so very much, Leonie. That's an absolutely amazing introduction. Absolutely humbled to be here today. So I think first off, it's very important and pertinent for me to highlight that I won't be having any slides, just like my other panelists. I think to those of you who are tuning in and who are listening and who have listened to me speak before in other panels, you'd know that I don't use slides. And I think mainly for this one, it's because I would like to share more on stories about the youths that I've worked alongside with, about what they think about the issue or advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I think when it comes to stories and when it comes to telling the stories from the ground, I don't think any slides can do justice to that. So bear with me as I speak and share with all of you my journey of actually working with the youths without any slides. I think what I do want to do today, Leonie, panelists, and the audience out there, is actually to dissect the issue of equity, diversity, and inclusion in higher education, and actually stream it a little bit deeper and draw the conversation a little bit deeper by exploring whether the main largest stakeholders of education, i.e. the ASEAN youths, essentially, because they are the primary recipient of higher education, whether or not they are able to relate to the policies created or to the internationalization of higher education, or even to the work that we are doing here in terms of advancing equity, diversity, and inclusivity. It's really vital to assess whether the stakeholders themselves resonate with what we are talking about today, number one, whether or not the stakeholders themselves are actually able to understand the impact of what we are talking about today, the impact of the policies that are designed for them, and whether or not they are actually able to benefit from the policies that are essentially made for them at the end of the day. Now, when I talk about stakeholders here, I don't just mean privileged youths. I don't just mean youths who are already in higher education, who are already in the university setting, but I'm also talking about the youths from the rural communities who essentially live in villages, who, due to the socio-economic factors, are not able or not given the necessary opportunities to voice out their opinions. I believe whenever we have policy dialogues such as this, which is an absolutely fantastic opportunity to speak about education, it is important for us to bring the voice of the voiceless in as well. And that is what I hope to do so today, especially when we talk about policies. I believe all the panelists that are here with me today agree with me that policies without proper implementation are essentially nugatory. And when we talk about implementation, on the other hand, they cannot be properly executed when the primary stakeholders, i.e. the youths that I'm talking about earlier, do not understand and do not resonate with the policies which ironically are essentially meant to benefit them. So on this note, I'd like to actually draw some examples from my experience working with the youths from the rural communities, those who are marginalized, those essentially who are disconnected from technology, disconnected from digitalization. When I speak to them about the education system, not just in Malaysia, obviously not just exclusive to Malaysia, because I am based in Malaysia, but also abroad in the ASEAN region as well. And when I bring forth the conversation about what they think about education and whether or not it is inclusive, the answer that they give is obviously no. And I think that is, logically, everyone here would agree that if you do ask them about education, they would definitely not feel included. And the reason why the answer is no is because they're never given a seat to the table to speak about policies related to education. They're never given a seat in terms of speaking about what they think might be good to be included in, let's say, education courses or education modules. And I think it's pertinent for me to start with this question about whether or not the stakeholders are able to relate to the policies that are being created, whether they are able to relate to what we are talking about today. Because I believe in one thing, Leonie, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot say that we are championing equity, diversity, and inclusion when we are not including the larger stakeholders of education into discussions, such as this one, or even in the parliament, meaning whether we are listening to them, the recipients of education, whether we take into account what they think or what they feel is best for them. It is time for us to embrace that intergenerational collaboration. It is time for us to embrace collaboration with multiple different partners and multiple youths from different backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, and essentially give seats to them to help curate and design education-related policies, because this is how we can augment equity, diversity, and inclusivity. Candidly speaking, we are actually far from achieving equity, diversity, and inclusivity, if you ask me, because the voice of the voiceless is still unheard, number one. And I believe it is our responsibility to give them a voice. To share with all of you, last year, the team at Accelerate Global, we had the opportunity to work with a group of community, with a group of youths in rural Borneo, Sabah, which is essentially a state in Malaysia. And when we rolled out our programs, which mainly focuses on entrepreneurship, we realized that some of the programs were not really benefiting these youths. And when we dissect further, we realized that the main issue was because we were the ones curating the modules and the courses without taking into account what they think is best for them. And I thought that was a really important lesson for me and my team. And I wanted to bring it today in our discussion, because a lot of times when we talk about policies, when we have policy dialogues, first and foremost, they're not included. Second of all, what we think might be best for them might actually not be. For instance, when we talk about, let's say in Malaysia, there's a lot of issues about whether or not to teach subjects in English. On one hand, on one wing, they say that when you teach subjects in English, it helps the students advance their careers abroad. But chances are, and having experience working with the underprivileged and the marginalized, some are still struggling to even read and write in their own language. Right. And so I think this is the challenge here, where we need to find the right balance of internationalization as well as localization to keep the higher education in respective ASEAN countries authentic. So in other words, essentially helping the youth advance themselves without pushing them away. So I think that is the main point that I wanted to bring forward. And I thought perhaps we can unravel more on this segment, or more on this key aspect of curating policies later in our discussion today. Back to you, Leonie.
Thank you so much, Rauda. I love the energy in your remarks and your presentation, and I think it was really important for especially policymakers here today to listen that we need more human-centered policies, human-centered design, human-centered policies, because at the grassroots level there seems to be definitely a disconnect. And I think our poll, which we have asked to our audience, is also linked to that. Rank the sector by the degree of impact on advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion in higher education. I think when I listen to you, I'm not sure if we should not give a bit more to social enterprises, the role of grassroots organizations on the ground when it comes to this as key drivers in advancing, especially the agenda, and then and giving inspiration. So fantastic, Rauda, wonderful to have you here. I move on to our last speaker today, Dr. Yang Mi Eng. This time I got your name right. Apologies for this at the beginning. Is she here with us? Yes, thank you. Dr. Yang, you are the Executive Director of the ASEAN Foundation, but you have actually a really wide experience, first in the business and government sector for over 26 years, and most recently here as Senior Vice President at Alpha Cap. You were the CEO of GameView, which is the largest mobile game publisher in Malaysia. And you also worked at Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation. So fantastic experiences in technology and multimedia. You know how to build platforms for the creative economy, for innovation, for entrepreneurship. So it's good to have you at the ASEAN Foundation also, because that is one of your roles here as well, develop programs which drive innovation in the region. I would like to highlight one point before I hand over the floor to you. You led the digital media sector foresight studies, and you created Malaysia's creative industry forecast for the next 30 years. That's even beyond Agenda 2030. So your foresight is important for us to listen to now when it comes probably also to digital skills, to the digital gap, to digital skills, and how this is important in the context of today. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonie. Actually, I didn't really prepare for the forecast because this is a different platform, but maybe I can put it in a little bit if I have time. I mean, and I'm really excited to see, I'm glad that you put me at the end because I can see everybody's presentation. I'm trying not to repeat whatever has been said. But I wanted to echo to what Rauda has mentioned, because Rauda represents the youth. The youth means what they want. Are we too happy with what we are doing in the policies level that we forgot whether this policy is really what the people need, the youth need? You know, we are talking about education now, tertiary education today. But I also wanted to echo to Rauda with my PPT. I mean, if the organizer can just share the PPT with me. Yeah. Just to highlight whatever Rauda has mentioned. Can it be expanded a little bit? Yeah. Can it be a full screen? Sorry. Yeah. So actually, I go to the second slide, straight zoom into the problems we have right now. Okay, in the midst of whatever we are trying to do, strategy and policy, this is very important to voice out and to discuss in this kind of platform. Actually, this is one of the platforms that we can do feedback, and the feedback will be taken back and collected and compiled by all the policymakers and shared with them. And then the better policies can be drafted later, because things change. I mean, as what I want to echo to Director Rodora mentioned, we have to be agile at this time, and we cannot be too rigid with whatever we are doing. And whatever Rauda mentions earlier is, are we doing something what the people want? Okay, we need CSO, we need people on the ground, social enterprises, we need youth to come forward. And there is a platform for youth actually to represent themselves in the ASEAN scope, ASEAN's meetings. So actually started from last year, thanks to, I'm not sure, none of us like COVID pandemic, but this pandemic actually, so much has been done during this 1.5 years. People are starting to think, and people are starting to focus on what is the gaps, what do we need to do to survive this kind of pandemic. So human beings are very creative. Our brains are not fully utilized. So if we are pushed to one level, we can do something amazing. So this is the disruptive situations, and we should actually take opportunity of this pandemic time to draft something, because this is the time we have a lot of time at home, in the office, to really look at what is lacking, what we need to do. So in terms of gender gaps, rural, urbans, if you see the slide, if you can see it, because my eye is really stressed a bit to see the size of it. So for instance, you look at Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. The chances of rural residents completing higher education is still very big gaps, 80% lower. This is huge. This is not small gap. And then in Thailand, 26% of children with non-Thai citizen drop out from school, compared to the Thai citizen 5% only. And you have adolescents from ethnic minorities are overrepresented in the dropouts, and they are actually mainly from Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, Timor-Leste, and Vietnam. This is quite latest data, 2019, before the pandemic. Next slide, please. So we are looking into also lack of access to education for students with disability. Now, all these gaps, I think it's time for us to really look into it and really see what we can do for this group. Because the disabled people, cannot talk, and there's no platform for them to talk, frankly speaking. They have talk, but it is not loud enough. So we need people, young people like Rauda, to represent the, the marginalized group, women also. But I think slowly, women, because the gender differences, disparity between gender educations has already been highlighted long time. So this is by default, everybody is aware of the gender disequality. So in terms of education technology, now I can see that during the pandemic, the gaps is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Something has to be done. Somebody has to come out. Especially the policy has to be private and also public partnership right now. Because if government cannot really handle this, it has to actually partners with the private sector. So you're looking at Indonesia investment in digital amounting to 1.3% of GDP only, while Thailand invested 2.4 and Malaysia 4.5. And this is really not a big number. And you are looking at Singapore 6.6. If you want to ask me the impact of technology, is it really important? You can see from these numbers already. How good is Singapore? Singapore's education is very, very matured in comparison with other countries in the 10 AMS. So you can see that the amount of GDP being invested in this sector. So aren't we supposed to be awake now and have some examples and some best cases even within our own region, to learn from each other. So I'm looking forward, because as an implementing agency, ASEAN Foundation, we do a lot of lifelong learning programs. So I go back to in Cambodia, Vietnam, a lack of adequate infrastructures also make and the distance to school also, and all these like bigger countries, like bigger geography countries, like perhaps you're talking about Indonesia, for instance. Perhaps you need infrastructure like a backbone, broadband, really good broadband to really reach out to the rural area, and also equipments. They can't afford equipment. They can't buy a smartphone and laptops and all that, So all this has to be looked into as a whole process and policies drafting, not only in terms of the structure of the education, which I think has been drafted and pretty matured already, but you need to look into the implementations portion and also the content. The content and the policy should be quite flexible, allowing customizations, I would just say, to the needs of the local people. So next slide, I would just share some of the next slide, please. Some of the programs that ASEAN Foundation has been doing in terms of lifelong learning. And this is one or two examples I'm sharing with you because we look very serious about gender equality also, and also marginalized group. So some of our program, we already extended to disadvantaged youth. you can see that our partnerships with ASEAN Data Science Explorer programs, we SAP, is already include the one section's spin-off is disadvantaged youth. And we already train and give them the future-ready skills of data analytics skills, 4,000 over students. And in terms of beneficiary to gender equality, we have almost equal gender participating and benefited from this program, which is 50-50%. So we are actually covering SDG 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, and 11. So most of our programs are multiple focus, and we try to, we are like a cook, you know. I mean that my team is very young. I mean, I have a very young team, and they actually design. They are very good cooks sometimes because they understand the needs of the industry and they understand the needs of the people. That's why they cook something out that we can actually achieve few things at once. Next, this is another programs that we have. It's ASEAN Digital Innovation Programs. It's an e-learning platform. It's a free e-learning platform. Now we partner with Microsoft, and we have a target at 15 to 35 youth, and then age, and then they use Python. They are trained, and then we already benefited 25,000 over youth, and equal also female and male, almost 50 to 41% to 49%. So our programs, and last but not least, my last PPT, next, is to try to see what we can do to move forward, you know, because I think assess the current new situations, because the pandemic has changed the landscape, how people access to information, how people do their learning. Of course, mobility is very important. Mobility, and you can exchange, and also single branded ASEAN scholarships. So we also have one scholarship where we partner with private entity, because I think this is, I always believe in public-private partnership also, because if we rely on government alone, sometimes this is, they will take some time because the policy approval and all that, the process. So if we are working with private, sometimes they can do things faster. So it is about high time for government also to look into outside than their own internal resources, because this pandemic has actually brought down so many economic stagnant in the world. And then I think putting some percentage increase in terms of for educations, you are fighting against health and other sectors. You know, you are fighting against climate change, you know, health, many things that actually pressing issues that really needs to be looked into. So for me, it's, if we cannot do it alone, we have to partner. So assess the current new situations, back to drawing board, and identify the gaps, because we have been always doing something from top to bottom. It has to be approached from bottom to top. You know, then only you can see, you know, what you are doing is appreciated. You know, and it can actually create impacts in another decades. You know, impacts cannot be created instant. You know, so I have always highlight this. That's why I did the forecast that time with Academic Science of Malaysia. We look into 5 years. You know, there is a techniques on back cast and front forward cast. You know, how you look at things and how you draft it. But of course, the pandemic this time is really something that very disruptful, and then many people have made some plan, but they have to actually modify and change it. So we have to develop plan, strategy, and initiative to support DEI in ASEAN. So we need also identify stakeholders' needs and get the buy-in from the local government, because the policies that make in ASEAN or Asia, sometimes with the government level or with the higher level, we need to really cascade it down to the government, local government. They have to be in the same line. Everybody has to be collaborative, work together, and help each other in ASEAN region. So if we want the prosperous and better inclusive diversity and equity level achievement for our educations, we need to work together. Okay, thank you very much, and I pass back the floor to the our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mi. And definitely from ASEAN side, we would love to work with you on these programs which you have introduced. I think it was very good to see that there is action, as you said, also from bottom up. We cannot only wait for policies, we need really the engagement from the people on the ground. And I fully agree with you, impact creation takes time. It has to do with awareness creation, change of perceptions, minds, behavior change. Let's hope it doesn't take 30 years, and we can measure it. That is what we hope for Wesley and his team. But yeah, wonderful presentation at the end to bring it all together. We have one last question for our audience. And the question was, at the very end, what are the most critical issues in the region related to equity, diversity, and inclusion? Why do we have this question at the end? Because obviously, after listening to the speaker's presentation, what have you kept most in your mind, or what do you think is most striking? Just a note for our audience members, you can also highlight and use the same words which are there to showcase that you agree with some of the suggestions which others have done. If I look at that slide right now, we have gender equality very much at the forefront. I saw a few times also urban versus rural divide. So that is something where Rauda is working on. We leave this on. You can still continue to comment. And I think I'm allowed, Darren, to ask one closing question. I see here a question from Bob. I see a question here, Bob Aubrey. Is shared policy being adjusted for new and dramatic challenges to DEI, for example, in Myanmar? Bob, obviously your question comes first before the moderator closes with the last one. Can I get all the speakers back maybe on screen, and who feels confident enough to answer this? Maybe somebody from the ASEAN Secretariat, maybe Rodora, Wesley maybe as well. I think this is more a policy question. Again, is shared policy being adjusted for new and dramatic challenges to DEI, for example, in Myanmar?
Okay. I will try to address this question as much as I can, although I'm afraid that I might have to start with some disclaimer, because when the extension phase of the share was approved by both sides, from ASEAN and the EU side, the pandemic was not yet, wasn't yet ravaging the region, and the situation in Myanmar has not happened yet. And therefore, whenever we enter into, contracting in terms of the actual implementation of the share program, we already have some, pre-agreed parameters in terms of how to implement the share policy. But moving forward, given the situation right now where, we have to take all of this, changes into consideration, we have the guidance from the ASEAN Working Group on Higher Education Mobility, which, would at least look into the higher education space in ASEAN and the contribution of share in it. So while we will not be able to really, adjust the details of the share program, but moving forward, we will be able to take into consideration all these changes around us. And I think what is more important is how ASEAN will be taking on the work that will be transferred by share later on, more than the actual share itself, which is actually ending by end of next year. Maybe Darren can add into this.
Thank you so much, Rodora. I actually think, looking at the program of the EU Share Policy Dialogue, this is something which you might discuss in the upcoming working group session, which is following in about 15 minutes. I take one last question. I raise one last question to all our 4 panelists. And with this also then I close and hand it over back to Darren. I was very much intrigued by Rauda's message that we have a disconnect between policymakers and the actual stakeholders and the beneficiaries. And you spoke about the youth and the young learners, but it is in general not only the young people in the higher education sector, there's also the whole lifelong learning sector. So we can, I think, talk about maybe a disconnect between all generations here. So my question to all of you, and please respond in 30 seconds. is with regards exactly to this disconnect, who is actually in the best position to act as a mediator and bridge the gap? Rauda, would you like to start? I can already foresee a little bit your answer.
There's a lot of pressure.
Still think about it.
There's a lot of pressure. I think this might sound a little bit biased, but I think youths should be the mediator just because we speak their language. And I think the language is really important because I think the reason why there's a disconnect is because we're not speaking the same language as the people on the ground. So I'd say youths, but not just privileged one, but actually community youth leaders as well who are on the ground. They've got lots of potential. I've worked a lot with them. So yes, it's for them.
Thank you so much, Rauda. I just move now on the screen to my right. Rodora, the floor is again yours.
I think governments are duty bound to really bridge that divide. So by all means, we have to do the best that governments can do. But, history has proven that, governments cannot do it alone, and therefore partnerships and cooperation are key.
Thank you. Please take this message along to your colleagues when you have your working group now in a few minutes. Mi-Eng, please.
Thanks. I think I agree with Rodora and also Rauda, but ASEAN Foundation do have a platform for youth to put your ideas. We have alumni. We have a box for you to suggest something and email to us. Usually the email will come to me directly and then I will just read it. And then if I can do it at my level with my team, we will do it. If not, I will normally discuss with ASEC. ASEAN Secretariat, see whether we can have a platform for them to discuss. We always have webinars, don't forget. So if we have webinars from now, please don't ignore us. Please attend, because if you want us to hear you, you have to attend our event. So I pass it back to Leonie. Thank you.
Thanks, Mi-Eng. And I think it's great to know when whoever suggests something, the email comes immediately and straight to you. So that is, I think, exactly what Rauda is also trying to push, not having these different levels of mediators, but basically going straight to the person in charge. And I'm quite sure that you will be able to respond quickly with this, with concrete programs, as you just did earlier. Wesley, we lost you at the beginning. Now we're keeping us crossed. The last message from you on this point.
Well, it's an honor, and I'm pleased to go last because I agree with all of our speakers. And the short answer from UNESCO would be, it depends on the call to action. It depends on the context. It depends on the question that's being asked. No single group can speak for youth. No single group can speak for all governments. No single foundation can do it alone. We cannot achieve sustainable development working in isolation. So what's exciting for the role of higher education, and that would be my answer, is that higher education can be this convenient, it can be this collaborative space for co-creation. And I think this is what we need, not someone to dominate or lead, but for government to allow that space to happen, for higher education to facilitate, listen, and to make a space for life and work in a sustainable way. We all have a voice in this space, and that's really what we want to do in an informed way so that people can participate in an informed way to achieve our collective goals. So we're excited about this next step, and I think I'm excited about this working group today that's taking shape and the opportunities that can come forward. So thank you again for the opportunity to be with you.
Thank you so much to all of you. Wesley, you mentioned it, higher education for co-creation, and this is my last message to you, also to you speakers, but also to our audience members. We are working with colleagues from the EU Share program, and especially with team leader Darren, on our next program, which is the ASEAN Regional Conference on Higher Education. The focus is on diverse and inclusive higher education in Asia and Europe. So it's exactly what we are talking about today. We launch an outlook report. It is not an outlook report for the next 50 years, 30 years. We are not able to do that, but until 2030. And the questions are here: what are the key opportunities and challenges for diverse and inclusive higher education across our both regions? So we are posting the information here in the chat. Who would like to participate is most warmly invited. And it would be lovely to see you there, and we are basically continuing our mission and our work. Thank you so much, and back to the EU Share Secretariat. Thank you.
Many thanks to you, Leonie, and our 4 excellent panelists for their excellent contributions and indeed agility this afternoon. We greatly look forward to continuing the conversation and also ensuring that we're walking the talk on equity, diversity and inclusion in the work of the SHARE programme as we move forward. We've really enjoyed the sessions over the last 3 days of the 12th SHARE Policy Dialogue. I would like to thank all of those who contributed to the development and delivery of our sessions. Our colleagues at the ASEAN Secretariat, the EU delegation to ASEAN, our regional partner organisations, and last but not least, all those who attended and engaged with us on the live stream. We'll be continuing our policy dialogues and many other discussions in different fora with our partners over the next year and over the course of 2022. And we'd be really pleased to hear from you if you'd like to be involved. So thank you once again to everyone who joined us over the last 3 days, and we're looking forward to speaking again soon.